Okay, let's dive into this because today we are looking at the ultimate story of us. Welcome to this explainer for your Lesson 12 Capstone reflection. We're going to map out the entire incredible chronological journey of modern world history designed specifically for your 7th grade timeline. We're going to see exactly how the world evolved from these highly isolated ancient medieval kingdoms into the incredibly fast-paced, totally connected global society that you're living in right now. So, our journey today is basically broken down into 4 parts: the Middle Ages, a changing world, modern times, and finally, connecting past to present. Let's start with our first era. Unit 1, the Middle Ages. Now, what's really interesting about this is if you think of this entire course like a massive series of falling dominoes, here is the ultimate mystery you are going to solve over your first 13 weeks. How did medieval societies actually organize power, belief, trade, and daily life? I mean, before the internet, before global shipping, before massive modern governments, how did people make sure they were safe? How did they eat? How did they even know who was in charge? Well, the answer to that mystery usually came down to one very specific concept.
And that concept is the feudal system. To put it simply, this was a way of organizing society, where local lords gave land and protection to people in exchange for their loyalty and their work. Just imagine living in a time where there's no national police force, no giant grocery stores down the street, and literally no central government to protect you. Your entire daily life, your sheer survival, depended entirely on these very local systems of power. You worked the land for a lord, and in return, you got to stay safely inside the castle walls when danger came knocking. It was highly localized. But here's the fascinating part. While Europe was doing this, the rest of the world was developing in entirely different ways.
Because history isn't just happening in one place. It is happening everywhere, all at once. While Europe was deep in its feudal system, you had these massive wealthy trade networks expanding in Africa. You had powerful dynasties in China, totally unique imperial systems in Japan, and entirely distinct thriving civilizations in the Americas. Geography basically dictated everything. If you lived near a river, or a mountain, or a desert, it completely shaped how your culture traded and developed.
So by the end of Unit 1, your transfer task isn't just going to be memorizing a bunch of random dates. You'll actually be experts at comparing these ancient empires based on worked examples from history. You'll be able to explain those feudal and imperial systems, analyze early global trade networks, and critically use geography to understand exactly why a culture developed the way it did. But eventually, those localized ancient worlds start to bump into each other.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Unit 2, a changing world.
Our essential question for this second era is this: why do new ideas sometimes transform whole societies? I want you to imagine what happens when those old, localized, medieval ways of thinking are suddenly challenged by massive new discoveries in art, science, and exploration. What happens when a radical new idea goes the historical equivalent of viral? Well, the ultimate viral moment of history was the Renaissance. This was a massive rebirth of learning, art, and science that completely challenged the old ways and sparked this fiery desire for new knowledge. It was literally the spark that lit the fuse for modern history. Suddenly, people weren't just accepting the way things had always been. They were looking around and asking, wait, why? And what if?
And asking those questions set off a massive domino effect sequence. First, the Renaissance changed art and learning. That new way of thinking led people to question religion, which gave us the Reformation. That questioning mindset then bled straight into science and philosophy during the Enlightenment, and when people began rethinking philosophy, they began rethinking who should actually rule them, which sparked massive political revolutions. Finally, with new political freedom and scientific breakthroughs, we get the invention of factories and machines, leading right into industrialization. One thing perfectly caused the next.
So the crucial point is the sheer contrast between where we started and where we ended up in Unit 2. On one hand, you had the small, localized world of the Middle Ages in Unit 1, where your whole life was pretty much bound to a tiny patch of land. But on the other hand, by the end of Unit 2, you have explosive, machine-driven, interconnected global industrialization. We literally went from farming by hand to factories pumping out goods around the clock. So here is your application task for Unit 2. You'll learn exactly how to trace those specific causes and effects of global change. You're going to compare reform movements, explain world-shaking scientific ideas, and evaluate just how much industrial change completely rewired human existence. And trust me, rewiring the world like that, it leads to some serious tension. Which brings us to Unit 3, Modern Times. Our final essential question is, how did conflict and connection shape the modern world? See, the industrialization from Unit 2 didn't just give us cool new machines. It created a world that was suddenly closer together than ever before. But tragically, it also made it more violently divided, because suddenly every single industrialized nation needed raw materials to feed their new factories.
And that aggressive competition for resources leads us directly to imperialism. This is simply when a powerful nation takes control of other countries to expand its own wealth and power. It's the aggressive, real-world consequence of nations competing for resources after the Industrial Revolution. European powers and others just started carving up the map, taking over regions across the globe to fuel their own economic fires. And when giant empires start expanding like that, they inevitably run right into each other.
Which brings us to this staggering timeline of 20th century dominoes. The fierce nationalism and imperialism of the early 1900s directly sparked the devastation of World War I. Then, the unresolved tensions and economic fallout from that war led right into the catastrophic destruction of World War II in the mid-1900s. The end of World War II immediately split the globe into two superpowers, sparking the intense nuclear anxiety of the Cold War. And the end of that Cold War birthed the deeply complex, hyper-connected contemporary world we live in today.
So in Unit 3, your capstone transfer task is to basically become historical detectives. You'll master the ability to analyze these monumental global conflicts. You'll explain how imperialism and nationalism drove nations to war. Importantly, you'll compare different historical perspectives because, as you'll see, history looks very different depending on who is telling the story. And finally, you'll connect all those past events directly to the present day.
Connecting it all, past to present.
Because all of this history, it isn't just dust in some old textbook. It is actively shaping the air you breathe and the world you walk around in today. 39. That is the total number of weeks you're going to spend across these three incredible units. 13 weeks in the Middle Ages, 13 weeks in a changing world, and 13 weeks in modern times. And I promise you this, by the end of this 39-week journey, when you look down at your phone and scroll through your newsfeed, the events happening across the globe are finally going to make sense. You'll know exactly why the world looks the way it does.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. If the dominoes of history started falling all the way back in the Middle Ages, shaping the empires, the revolutions, and the wars that built our contemporary world, what current global issues are being shaped by the dominoes falling right now? You are absolutely a part of this continuing story. Get ready for an amazing course, and we will see you next time.